Marty, what a fantastic presentation. I'm a statistician, I'm an editor for Cochrane Stroke. And yes, so group analysis is usually one of those things authors have issues with. So thank you so much. I'm gonna send them to this recording now in the future for how long we got left. No, thank you so much. However, I want just one little clarification. At the beginning, you said that the geographical split can only be by study. However, there's a caveat to that. They are multinational trials, and sometimes if you have the IPD for them, you could have the split within a trial. So just for that. But my question is, I struggle with what is a quantitative effect and a qualitative effect. I've never seen them in that, and it seems to me, but clarify me because and apologies about the ignorance, that when they are in different directions, the effect is qualitative, but we're in the same direction, is quantitative. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing, finally, I think would like to make emphasis on what you said, because they are a priori subgroup analysis, and it really bothers me, like, as a statistician. Then I understand authors don't want to show it because the show has shown nothing, but I agree with you. You have to justify why you're not doing it. Like, we did it and we found out that rather than it's not done and it totally disappeared, and I would query them on that. It's like, why did you not do it? And then they'll come back to me, So I think that's very important. Thank you so much. This is fantastic. I loved it. I don't know if you saw me sending you hearts during the talk. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions through on the chat. So Jose is saying, do you have any thoughts on the appropriate number of studies per subgroup, which I guess is the $1 million question?
Yeah, I don't think there's a, surefire cut-off point where you can say this number is fine and this number isn't. That little excerpt from the Cochrane Handbook suggests that 10 should generally be included in the meta-analysis to do a subgroup analysis. But of course, that won't be enough if you have one subgroup with 9 studies in it and one with 1 study in it. So you'd want to see a approximately even balance, I would say, but also to consult with clinicians as well, and to get their opinion on it as well. But I don't think there's a specific number of trials that you can say, yes, that's definitely enough now. And it'll depend on the number of participants as well and the number of events. So there was that in the real life subgroup analysis, there was that one study with very wide confidence intervals where there was, I can't remember exactly how many patients were in it, but the number of events in particular was very small. So, and that can lead to very wide confidence intervals and uncertainty. So it's important to consider that as well as just the number of studies.
Brilliant, thank you. And some more questions on the chat. Again, apologies for my pronunciation. Voldemort has asked, thank you for the presentation. I wonder why the fixed effect was used in the real Cochrane review example and also in your artificial example. Wouldn't it be more logical to use random effects?
So here, hopefully there's very little heterogeneity in this analysis. So, and even in the overall pools analysis, which we have presented here, there's very little heterogeneity in the whole thing. So hopefully you'd agree that fixed effects is it's not out of the question to use fixed effects here. Obviously it would depend what you'd specified in your protocol, but I certainly wouldn't say that using fixed effects here was wrong. For the so I have to go through all this again. For the next one, so I did use random effects here because there's heterogeneity within each subgroup still, so I wanted to make sure that that heterogeneity was taken into consideration. So that's the reason for the random effects there. Oh gosh, sorry. So example 3, again, there's very little heterogeneity in this one. This one, you know what, this one is a bit of a difficult one, because the overall heterogeneity in the analysis is quite low, and I have presented the overall pooled effect, and there's fixed effects there, but then there is moderate heterogeneity here, so I think random effects could be justified, and it isn't a very easy decision. I'm just trying to sort of point out that when I was putting these examples together, I did think about fixed or random effects and what would be best to present. So it wasn't just a case of applying fixed effects to all of them. Yeah, this last one again, used fixed effects here because we haven't presented the overall effect, and within the subgroups there's no heterogeneity at all. And the last one was the real life one, and yeah, again, there's I think if there was an overall pooled effect here, then I definitely want to see random effects being used there, but then there's also a question of whether it would really make sense to do a pooled result here, and because there's very little heterogeneity in each subgroup, the original author stuck with fixed effects here, and I don't think that that's particularly wrong. So hopefully I'll just come back to the chat now to see if there are any more comments. It was from Waldemar. Has that sort of answered your question? Oh, he's put thank you. Great.
Brilliant. Brilliant, thanks. So the next question in the chat is from Alexander, and so I'm remembering situations where we wanted to do subgroup analyses to compare adjusted and non-adjusted results in observational studies. Some studies would report both, but other studies reported only one or the other. What would be your recommendation, including only those studies that report both, or include all studies?
Okay, so I probably wouldn't call that a subgroup analysis, because a subgroup analysis is when we're interested in whether some characteristic is modifying the treatment effect. And I wouldn't necessarily say that you are interested in whether there's a subgroup effect, as you're more just interested in whether the results vary. So I would probably refer to that as stratified analyses or sensitivity analysis, maybe, where you're looking at different approaches to doing your analysis. I certainly would say that if you have studies reporting both unadjusted and non-adjusted results, then you would want to make sure that you're not including those twice in any meta-analysis. So if you're including them on the same forest plot, then there certainly shouldn't be a pooled result there. Otherwise, you'll be including results for the same participants twice. So I think I have these conversations with authors quite a lot about whether it is actually a subgroup analysis that they're wanting to do, or whether it's more a stratified analysis. I think what I would probably, it is a difficult one that requires a bit of thought. I think I would more say, my preference tends to be from observational studies to use adjusted results. So I think my initial thoughts on this is to use the adjusted results where available, and then to conduct sensitivity analysis to see what happens when you add in non-adjusted results. But I think this is sort of a bit of a different thing to subgroup analysis.
Great, thanks. I'm going to just move because a tutor has got their hand raised, so I'll unmute. Okay, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much it was very insightful presentation. I think that I have several points here to discuss maybe, or to ask your opinion. When you say we shouldn't present results on subgroup analysis in certain areas, for example, if there is small number of studies. But I think that that approach in a way is wrong, because one of the reasons why we conduct systematic review and with or without meta-analysis is to identify gap in evidence, or where there is lack of consistency, lack of number of trials, and it's the only way to graphically present. All these I-squares and effects, wouldn't they be captured in the grade analysis when we interpret findings? Also, we cannot forget publication bias and the funnel plots. And all these have to be presented as a whole, rather than just looking at meta-analysis. Another factor here to consider would be the risk of bias of each study. So to explore the heterogeneity. You mentioned previously about observational studies in meta-analysis and adjusted. That will be difficult to put together studies that don't adjust for the same covariates. Otherwise, we will have very distorted results. So what is your opinion about all? I had also mentioned fixed and effect, random effect, but you already covered it. About the clinical significance of findings, I think because I work at NICE, so we use minimal important differences that will be needed to show that there is, regardless of statistical significance, how they can interpret in thing, is it clinically meaningful? So this is arbitrary, probably, how each group who is doing systematic review and interpretation of findings are finding these levels, or whether they will go to COMET to find if there is any reported meaningful difference, or they will just take the statistical one for the confidence intervals. So these are, I mean, I'm touching a lot of things in a very short time, but because I'm interested in the whole, and that's the point of systematic review, to see everything as the whole picture rather than just forest plots. Thank you.
Okay, so you did raise a lot of points there, and I'm not sure I'll be able to address all of them. But the first thing that you mentioned was about if there's only a small number of studies, and my recommendation that if there's very few studies, to not present the analysis. So as I said in the presentation, it's always the author's decision whether or not that analysis is particularly useful. I was thinking about the scenario where you're trying to maybe explore heterogeneity, and you have an analysis with very few studies that's showing very little, it has little information to add to your review. And I was just kind of pointing out that you don't have to present the graph if it's not adding anything. You can make the point, like you said, you can make the point that that this is a gap in the research. You could say we wanted to do this subgroup analysis, or we did do this subgroup analysis, but it wasn't useful because there wasn't the evidence there. You can still, if that's an important point to raise in your systematic review, you can raise that in several places. But if the graph itself isn't explaining any heterogeneity or providing anything of any use, I'm just kind of trying to say that you don't always need to show it. Or alternatively, if you do want everything to be available, if anyone wanted to see it, you could always include it in the additional materials. So that there's multiple ways of doing it, and I'm definitely not saying that one way is the right way. Subgroup analyses are complex, and there's definitely no one approach fits all. The other thing that you mentioned that I did just want to comment on was the grade, and how this fits in with grade. Now, unless you have pre-specified a protocol stage, and I don't know if Rachel might have any thoughts on this. Grade isn't really my area of expertise, but I would imagine that results from subgroup analyses wouldn't normally end up in your grade table unless from the outset you had said that you were very interested in a particular subgroup of patients, and in that case then it would end up in the grade. But otherwise I wouldn't have thought that grade would be the place to present the results of your subgroup analyses.
Yes, yeah, I agree, Marty. We would probably discourage people from putting subgroup analyses in the grade table, generally in the summary of findings table, and certainly not put them in the table if they weren't pre-specified. Yeah, I agree.
I do apologise, Tutor. I don't think that I have responded to all of the issues that you raised, but you raised so many valid points, but I don't think I can address them all in the 4 minutes that we have remaining.
It was more about for everybody who is here present, listening to your great presentation. It's just in short time you can't just capture everything that and the interaction between all different aspects of meta-analysis. And this is the problem. Usually, very often, sensitivity analysis is mixed up with subgroup analysis, and I don't know. Probably Rachel is nodding, so she has seen it. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sometimes, quite often, we will tell authors that it's not a subgroup analysis they've done; it's a sensitivity analysis, and kind of vice versa. So yeah, it can be difficult.